Hey, welcome to another broadcast. And I know it's the holiday season. Today is Christmas, so hope you guys had a wonderful day today, regardless if you celebrate it or not. To me, that doesn't matter. What does matter is anytime when we have family that are able to get together and put aside their differences or whatever and get together, that is something to acknowledge. That is something to celebrate. And so for that, yeah, we down with that. We're okay with that. I'm not going to, there's plenty of videos out here that are doing these full breakdowns and telling you what, things of Christmas is pagan and all of that. Meanwhile, you using pagan monies, you're using pagan clothes and all this stuff. But anyway, we're not going to get caught into that. So welcome. Let's go ahead and get things started here. And we're going to give people time to get in on here. And again, we'll be starting here. Give us about a little over a minute, and then we're going to dive in. It's going to be a wonderful, yet another wonderful topic. Glad to have you here. All right, and while we're here, giving people a little bit of time to get on. Remember, well, I tell you what, the sale that we have going on right now, up to 30% off, it's a few more days, it's going to be over. This is probably one of the longest sales we've had over at Saba Tree. Make sure you jump on it, just another few days, and we're going to cut it off, okay? And right now, I told you we have our natural stone sale collection that's going on right now. Beautiful handcrafted collection that we have. You can guys definitely check that out. Okay, definitely check that out. Beautiful collection, for you around your neck. Turn the noise down. I think we got some wrist pieces, not sure, but some beautiful handmade pieces there over at again sabatree.com. Then we have these other things here. These are some special things that we have. The fresh bamboo sea moss body oil. That's something that we came up with. Look at the ingredients, y'all. I mean, it's all 100% natural. None of this in here is going to make you more ashy. We don't do that. Okay. Fresh bamboo sea moss body oil, 50% off. 40% off our purifying facial cleanser. Also natural ingredients. Sea moss as a main ingredient in there, and that gives you kind of an overview of all the things that are on sale right now. I just had some of this today, y'all. We still getting messages from people saying, man, this tea is off the chain. So you definitely want to check that out, y'all. All right, so again, don't miss out. You got another few days, and we're going to be going into the new year with a whole nother situation. But make sure you check this out again over at Saba Tree, sabatree.com. All kinds of teas, body care stuff, all kinds of stuff. Sabatree.com. Then I'm pulling something up here. Let me pull this up here. All right. Let's get this up here on the screen here. Glad to have you guys here. I'm just pulling some more stuff up here. The video that we did, the last one we did, the Jewish involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, their own sources. I told you guys, as promised, I'm gonna have some, I took all my slides that I used in that video and I made it into a free downloadable document that you can download. It's PDF, and the link is right there. You could check that out. Okay. It's free. You don't have to pay anything for it. It's just one of the things I do, and I actually added some more entries. Let me just mention a couple of these other things, and I'll circle back and I'll read some of the other entries that I put in there. And this is great research. So anytime when this topic comes up, you don't have to go combing through bookmarks and all that kind of stuff. You have a full document that has all of these quotes in there, but there's also books and stuff too. But we trying to condense some of these things, and I'll be adding a lot more to these things as well. And in the last broadcast towards the end, we gave big shout out to Nation of Islam for their book, the secret relationship between blacks and Jews on that. But also tonight we're going to be giving shout out to another individual by the name of Dr. Tony Martin, and we're going to be looking at his lecture, and then also we'll be looking through his book as well, because he goes into this stuff. And so what we're doing is really paying homage to these individuals who have put a lot on the line to get this information out. And we're going to just, the baton has been passed, and we're going to keep right on doing that. The other thing I want to mention too is, where is it? It's where did I put it? It's our digital library. Here it is, the digital library, you guys. Remember, over 700 books. This is not a small thing, y'all. This is pretty big. Over 700 books that you have access to. As I've been telling you, you cannot, particularly those of us, and I'm going to give you some reasons why you cannot, particularly as Black Americans, we cannot depend simply just on this system to preserve our history and to preserve our document history. We can't depend on that. You certainly can't depend on Chat GPT or Grok or any of these other platforms. You cannot depend on them, because again, the information that they give you when you ask a question, particularly about Black history or anything for that matter, it's going to give you preferred history, the preferred resources. That's going to pull from the preferred sources, right? It's not going to pull from some of these other books that are maybe out of print, or, books that have been banned. A lot of times it's not going to pull from that. So it's on us as individuals to make sure that we're creating our own repositories to make sure that this information is being preserved. And that's what we're doing here. So you get access to over 700 books. At the end of this broadcast, I'm actually going to what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add some more sources to this collection. I'm actually going to add a lot more sources to this collection. So in addition to more books and more research papers, I'm also going to be adding some documentaries. Some of these documentaries are going to be banned documentaries that you won't be able to find on most platforms. But these are things that I've collected over the years. And so you want to make sure that you get access to it, because it ain't going to just be books. I'm going to be putting a bunch of stuff on there. Okay. I'm a firm believer in giving people, whatever access I get to things, I'm a firm believer in passing that on and not showing like these little excerpts. So you have to depend on me to give you the whole lesson and all of that. I'm going to give you just the entry point, but I'm going to lean on you to make sure you do the full research and then give you the whole access to all of it. Okay. Especially if you are a homeschooling parent, this is something you definitely want to have access to. Okay. It's not a monthly thing. It's $9.99, y'all. $9.99. Bro, that ain't nothing. I mean, that literally is nothing. A one-time fee, you get access to all of that. And so there's two ways you can gain access. One is by our Cash App, and the information is right there. Or the other way is by doing the if you go to the thanks button here on our YouTube channel, under this video, you'll see something that says thanks or $sign or whatever. You can do that as well, and just pay it that way, and then send me an email. My email address is connect@journeymanandwoman.com. connect@journeymanandwoman.com. That's my email address. I'm gonna say it one more time. connect@journeymanandwoman.com. Okay. And then send me an email and say, hey, I, paid, the YouTube way. I didn't do Cash App. I did the YouTube way. You got to email me once you do that so that I'll know where to send it. Okay. Send the link, because if you don't do that, I'm not going to know who to send it. Okay. So make sure you send me an email after you do that. Okay. And I'll make sure I get it to you ASAP. Okay. In the message, it's going to have, I'm going to tell you, hey, there's a link in here. It may not be like a link like that. It may just show up as a button. Just click on the button. It'll take you immediately to the folder. And then if you just, under every folder, you see I got it all organized. When you go to the right side of every line, if you will, you're going to see 3 dots. That's where you can see the download option, and then you'll be able to download once you get in. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to get all of that out. Make sure you know, but this is something, y'all jump on this stuff while we're still able to do it. Okay. All righty. So we got all of that out of the way, and let me see if I can pull up. It would be the best way I can do this here. Hold on. Let's see. Let me pull up. And big shout out, of course, to everybody that's in the chat. Good to see each and every one of you. Todd in the house, Justice in the house, William Rivers in the house. Good to see each and every one of you guys. Really appreciate you guys for real being here. Let me pull up our thing here, and let me show you the entries that I added to this PDF. This PDF I'm going to show you now. This is the why is this thing opening up? What's going on? This PDF I'm showing you now, this is free. All right. This is free. If you go to that link, you'll be able to pull it up, and then, yeah, it's free. All right. So let's see. All right, there you go. All right. I was like, don't play with me. Anyway, let's go to this. There it goes. And so, yeah, so when you look through this, again, like I said, this is free. I'm not charging for this. You can just download this, go there. So, I'm just going to thumb through it real quick. You see, I have all these excerpts here of different sources. All right. All right. So I just added some in there. Okay, let me go back here, and let me go to, let me see. It was this one. Okay. I think it was this one. Okay. It was this one. Okay. So this, I'm going to start here. This is the book, The Fate of the Jews, People Torn Between Israeli Power and Jewish Ethics. I think this was one here. Let me see. I'll just read it. It says, historically, the relationship between Jew and Black in America had not been one of equality. Jews were treated. Oh, no. I read that one. I remember reading that one. Okay, let me see. Okay, it was this one. Okay, this is from the book on New World Jewry. This is the latest one. This is, I didn't mention this in the video because, I came across, as I start digging more, I start finding more stuff, and I added these later. All right, so this is the source where it comes from. I even give you the page numbers there. All right, so let me go ahead and read this to you real quick. Trading and serving as merchants included owning warehouses with inventories to outfit the largest sailing vessels to make ship repairs. The Jews were the largest ship chandlers in the entire Caribbean region, where the shipping business was mainly a Jewish enterprise. You read that? That's from their sources. That's not me saying that. So for them to try to minimize it and try to say they were just kind of little innocent merchants just passing through, let's read it again for the people in the back. The Jews were the largest ship chandlers in the entire Caribbean region, where the shipping business was mainly a Jewish enterprise. The Jews were the principal purveyors of the government, although there never were more than 2,000 Jews in, and they named the town Caraco. Hope I'm saying that right. It is conservatively estimated that the Jews owned about 200 vessels during the first 60 years of their settlement. The Jeshurun family alone owned over 100 ships sailing the seven seas in the 1800s. Does that sound like to you? Oh, it was just a tiny, they were just tiny amount of people involved, Jews involved, that's it. That sound tiny to you? All right. Shipping and trading did not lack difficulties. A good part of the trade with the Spanish possessions was clandestine. The Jews armed the vessels to defend themselves against pirates, privateers. The ships were not only owned by Jews, but were manned by Jewish crews and sailed under the command of Jewish captains. Yeah, it's their writings. Emmanuel's of 81 pages, let's see, supplies the names of the ships and the years acquired, the owners, the value of the ships stated in pesos, the names of the captains, and their other pertinent information. Many of the ships were engaged in bringing slaves from Africa to the 13 colonies, the British islands in the Caribbean, and the Spanish colonies. This is their sources. This is what their sources say. This is another one here I added. Jews and Judaism in the United States, a documentary history. Jews also took an active part in the Dutch colonial trade, slave trade. Indeed, the bylaws of the Recife, something in other congregations, included an imposta, a Jewish tax of 5 soldos for each Negro slave a Brazilian Jew purchased from the West Indies Company. Slave auctions were postponed if they fell on a Jewish holiday. In Curaçao, the 17th century, as well as in the British colonies of Barbados and Jamaica in the 18th century, Jewish merchants played a major role in the slave trade. In fact, in all the American colonies, whether French, Martinique, British, or Dutch, Jewish merchants frequently dominated. So again, we call full BS on all of these individuals that are out here trying to make it seem that if they were just some minor, tiny little bit. No, they're saying in their own writings, again, let's read that for the people in the back. Jewish merchants played a major role in the slave trade. In fact, in all the American colonies, whether French, Martinique, British, or Dutch, Jewish merchants frequently dominated. That is their words. That's not my words. So they can't back off of that. All right. And then there was a few other things that I added as well. So make sure you go to our community page and you'll see that right there. You'll see that in there. OK. And you'll be able to download that and use that for free. Let me check this out for y'all. Let me look at these comments here real quick and see, make sure I'm catching up here. They said someone was like a New World Jewelry, that book there. He says about $3,000 on Amazon. Well, I know a place where you can get it for a lot less than that. Wink, wink. I already been talking about it. So I hope you get the message and the clue on what I just said there. Okay. Let's see. Here's another person here. This is the same tired argument that I hear over and over again. But where are all the ships? LOL, not a lot of them were ever found. Well, here's the jokes on you on this. Because again, this has been addressed over and over and over again. First, you have to familiarize yourself with these tall ships. You have to familiarize yourself with this. These tall ships were made not out of steel. They were made out of wood. Okay. And so because they were made out of wood, they had to constantly be repaired. This is across the board, regardless if you're talking slave ships, if you're just talking tall ships in general, they had to constantly be repaired. Why? Because they're dealing with all the elements when you're on the ocean, that salt water and the damage it does to wood and all of that. You have to constantly repair this. I've actually spent a lot of time learning about these tall ships and the repairs and stuff that had to be done on a constant basis. It was very expensive just to take care of these ships on a regular basis. Okay, so a lot of these tall ships you're not going to find. In most cases, that you're not going to find them. The ones that we have around today are the ones that they were able to preserve. But the overwhelming majority they're not going to find. That's number one. Number two, slavery was outlawed. Okay, it was outlawed all across the oceans. It was outlawed. So when something is outlawed, do you preserve it so that one day you're like, I want to preserve this so it can sit in a museum? No, you get rid of it. You burn the evidence. And that's what a lot of these ships, that's what happened. There's one called the Cotilla that they found down in, I believe, in Alabama, and it actually was charred because the owners of that ship were trying to burn the evidence. They were trying to get rid of it because slavery was outlawed. They weren't supposed to be doing that anymore. So yeah, so this is why you won't find these ships. So anytime when I hear people bring this argument up, trying to dismiss that slavery, the transatlantic slave trade never happened, my advice is always, y'all just take a few moments and just familiarize yourself with how that works and how these, the preservation of these tall ships and all of that stuff, and then the rest of the history. Okay, so no, just because you don't see a active slave ship in a museum, it doesn't mean that it never took place. Okay, so that would be my encouragement to you to kind of dig in a little bit on that. Okay, but anyway, so that's that. And so just again, what we present here is just a launching pad. And what I always encourage viewers is to go deeper and look this stuff up yourself. Okay. All right. So let's see. Now we're going to get into Dr. Tony Martin. I'm going to play his video, and we're also going to look through his book. Very interesting book here. Let's take a see what I want to do with this. Let me mention one person first. Then I'm going to look at the preface of his book. We're going to look at that. Then we're going to play his whole discussion. That's what we're going to do. All right. So let's talk about this individual first that I'm sure many of you are familiar with his name, David Duke. David Duke. I know for some of you who are of a certain age, I'm sure you've heard of that name, David Duke. Okay. David Duke was a politician, I believe, in Louisiana. Someone can correct me on this. It was years ago, but he definitely had some, let's just say some Klan experience, some background. But he got into politics and he was trying to distance himself from that. But some of the principles of what he believed were still there. And so rightfully, those things were called out, and like it should be. You're going to have to carry those ideologies, you got to be questioned about that, And so he was called out on that. And of course, he never won re-election and all of that stuff. So David Duke became synonymous with everything racist. But David Duke, he was also what we call a white supremacist. Okay. Now, when we hear the words supremacist or white supremacist, what we automatically assume or what we conclude is that means a world without black people, period. We don't want to exist with any black people. In fact, we want to destroy all black people. Now, are there white supremacists that think that way? Yeah, they are. But do they all think that way? Believe it or not, no. White supremacists, I'm not saying, hey, let's all be family with white supremacists. That is not where I'm going with this. Okay, so relax, cool your jets. That's not what I'm saying here. Because just as you have white supremacists, you have black supremacists. So let me ask you, black man and black woman, which one would you rather be with? Would you roll with a white supremacist or would you roll with a black supremacist? Well, most of us as black folks, we will go with who? The black supremacist. There's both still supremacists. Now, if you consider yourself a black supremacist, are you necessarily concluding that you want all other people who are not black to be wiped out and destroyed? No, you're not. You just want a world or society that prioritizes black people, right? That's what you want. Well, it's the same thing with white supremacists. Well, if you look at the Nation of Islam, for example, they actually met with and sat down with white supremacists, because you had white supremacists who were saying, hey, listen, Nation of Islam, we're at an impasse here. Okay, we're going to believe what we believe. you're going to believe what you're going to believe. Okay. And so what they said is, let's go this way. Let's propose this. You take this part of the country and you say that, and let's say that this whole part of the country is going to be for black people. Like, y'all can have this whole part of the country, right? This is what they were talking about. And then for us as white people, we'll have this whole part of the country, and then it will be that. Now, personally, I don't think that would have worked anyway, but that's kind of how they were thinking during that time. So when you hear people like David Duke or some of these other white supremacists like that, that's kind of how they think. And they're like, listen, we want a society that's absent of you people. And likewise, black folks are saying, who consider themselves black supremacists, come to the same conclusion. We want a society that's absent of you people. Okay, so it's the same thing. All right, so again, I'm not making any excuses and saying we need to network or to talk to or sit down with these folks. I'm simply saying understand what this thing really means, because the media, what the media has done is taken this word supremacist and only assigned it to one group. But in reality, you got black supremacists. You got, I'm out here in the West, you got people who are Mexican supremacists. You know, it's all over. You understand what I'm saying? So let's take an honest look at this word. You understand? So anyway, so David Duke, he, a few years ago, he was going to be on this show because he actually, before the book came out, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, he actually came out with a book where he actually looked at the Jewish involvement within the transatlantic slave trade. And so when he did that, he actually, and he was talking about this, he said he actually sat down with people of the Nation of Islam and shared this information. And of course, they were like, oh, snap, we need to look into this further. Okay. And so that's how you got the book. And so anyway, David Duke was invited to a show on PBS. It's not on, obviously, right now, but I forgot the name of the show. But he was invited to this show on PBS. It's a black show. You know how, think of these talk shows, like they'll have like the audience and then they have like guests that come in or whatever. So he was invited to this show. It's a true story, to basically to give this whole talk about Jews that were actually involved in the transatlantic slave trade. They recorded the show, and guess what happened? PBS was about to broadcast it, but once they heard what was going to be talked about, you had these different, the ADL, I believe, was one, but there was other Jewish groups got together. They actually took PBS to court, and basically was able to get a Jewish judge who basically told PBS, you can't broadcast that episode. You can't broadcast it. Now, again, this is David Duke going to a black talk show, and he was presenting this information. He wasn't going there and talking about white power and all this other stuff. He was talking about this information that we're talking about now. They had no problem with black people talking about anything else, but once this topic came up, all of a sudden now they said, nope, we're going to make sure that PBS never broadcasts it. And I actually looked up this episode. I can't even find it. I can't find it anywhere. I literally can't find it anywhere. When I tell you they buried that thing, they buried it. I found other episodes, but I can't find that one. Now I'm going to keep looking, but I can't find it. But it's so funny to me because this is their information. They recorded this stuff. That's not our information. This is what you guys presented. So I thought that was an interesting thing there. So anyway, no, it wasn't Frontline. It was, if you give me a moment, I'll find it. It wasn't Frontline. It was, let me see. Let me see if I can find it for you, man. I'm looking now. I'm doing this just for you. Let me see if I can find it for you. It's not there. Let's see. Oh, here it is. It was called Black Perspective on the News. That's what it was called. It's called Black Perspective on the News. This is PBS. Black Perspective on the News. That's the name of the show. All right. Yeah, I know. For someone to say, I never heard of it. I haven't heard of it. That was a while ago. Okay, I don't remember that. But yeah, that's the name of the show. It's called Black Perspective on the News. But yeah, someone mentioned he was probably on Tony Brown too. So yeah, you can look that up. You may or may not be able to find it here on YouTube, but there's other places you can look though. All right. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to this right here. Let me see. Okay, so here's the book that he came out with. All right. And then we're gonna roll to his talk in a moment here, but I wanted to get to this. It's called as you can see there, the Onslaught. I'll just say that, okay? I'm saying that for, because those two words together may trigger something. But you see it right there, Tony Martin, The Onslaught. And again, there is a place where you can find this book. I'll just leave it at that, okay? So I'm just trying to help y'all out. All right, so Tony Martin, basically, he was a professor. These are all the other books that he's 1993. All right, so let's go to, and that's him right there. Wellesley College. All right, so let's read the beginning here, okay? And then we're going to jump to him actually talking. All right. In January 1993, on the eve of the Jewish blank against me for teaching that Jews were implicated in the African slave trade, I already had some interest in Black-Jewish relations. It is difficult not to, if someone teaches African American history. I have also done some research on Jewish refugee immigration to Trinidad in the 1930s and 40s. This research was facilitated by the cordial cooperation of Jewish informants in 2 Caribbean countries. United States Jews encountered in the course of the research displayed the gamut of reactions, from friendliness to suspicion to hostility. The idea of a Black man turning up at a Jewish archive to research Jewish history proved unnerving to some. On the other hand, Jewish scholars are a familiar sight at Black archives, not only as researchers, but sometimes even as staff archivists. One of the most prestigious, listen to this, y'all, listen. One of the most prestigious of the Black archival repositories, the Moreland Spingham, am I saying that right? Spingham collection of Howard University is actually part named after a Jew. Full stop. So here you have a archive repository that's supposed to be for Black folks. Why in the world is it named after a Jewish person? Why are they in the sentence? Why are they there? But it doesn't stop there, because when he said that, when I was reading that, I said, that reminds me of another place too, where you see this. I told you, these folks always stay up in our business. Now, this is in Harlem. Let me bring this up here. How many of you guys heard this? The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Now, wait a minute. What if I was to come up with the Kwame Jackson Research Center in Jewish Culture? What if I was to come up with that? Do you think that would fly? You think that would fly? But it's always this one-way street stuff. You see this? The Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And when I tell you the information that they have beyond that, someone say gatekeeping, exactly. This is the place, I didn't physically go here, but this is the place where I was able to uncover a lot of the history of Black Hebrew Israelites that you're not going to find a lot of places. Because the Schomburg Center, just to give you an understanding, it's in Harlem. And remember, we talked about how the Black Hebrew Israelite movement mainly started in Harlem. And so the people, when you talk about the commandment keepers, the founders of the commandment keepers, they were handwriting notes and all of this stuff and documenting their belief systems, all of that stuff. They were documenting their diaries and stuff like that. Guess who owns all of that? They do. They do. So all of these black folks out here that want to say this is our history and all that stuff. Okay, but guess who owns your history, Black Hebrew Israelite? They do. So you're under them. You can't escape it. They have your culture. They have your historical records. So if you are a Black Hebrew Israelite and you want to know your history of how your movement started, it starts there. It doesn't start with somebody here on YouTube pretending to know all of this stuff. It starts there. I had to go on their website and find this stuff. For some people, what I just said, it's going to fly right over your head. But it don't start there. See, it starts in my spirit. Okay, whatever. But for the rest of us, we're about documenting history. And I'm telling you, a lot of it is there. They have it. Okay. Anyway, so I thought that was really interesting. Let me go to back here to. There we go. All right. Not too much more reading here. Okay. One of the Jewish archives I visited, the lady in charge, now check this out. The lady in charge characteristically put me through the appropriate litmus test. Do you know Lynn Jeffries, she asked, with the mien of one presiding over an inquisition. I wonder if knowing Lynn Jeffries automatically disqualifies me from using these archives. I'm used to myself, but like George Washington, I could not tell a lie, so I was constrained to be forthcoming. Yes, I know him, I replied. We are professional colleagues. I have known him for many years. She was visibly taken aback by the answer, and I feared the worst. She regained her composure, however, and the interrogation continued. Have you read The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews? You see all of this interrogation. Now, if he was going to a regular black museum, let's say if he was a white person going to a black museum and said, "Hey, I want to gain access to some of these collections here," you know what most black museum curators will say? "Oh yeah, okay, sure, sign here and go." But these folks here, they see a black man trying to go to their stuff that's pretty much open to everybody, at least it should be. They look at the ringer they're putting them through. But yet these same people have museums, black museums. They are curators of black history. And black folks just sit back and just shrug our shoulders, and we just thanking God that at least we got a museum. It's so nice up in here. Anyway, I have heard of it, I replied truthfully, but I have not read it. Funny enough, though, I passed somebody selling it on the sidewalk just a few minutes ago. Y'all remember, man, some of y'all that my age, you remember back in the day when this book came out? Yes, sir, they were selling this, and you can get some cologne too. You can get yourself back in the day, bro. When this book came out, you can get from the same corner, you can get your copy of that book. You can get you a bean pie and some cologne. Smell good, be fed, and be educated with one passing. You don't see that stuff now, don't you? Ain't that messed up? Anyway, my reading of the book was still a few months into the future, but already I could not fathom what all the fuss was about. If it was established, I suggested to her, that white people enslaved Africans, and if Jews were an important part of white society, then why should anyone be upset by a book that illustrates the Jewish role in the slave trade? My innocent question now appears to have been endued with prophetic insight, or maybe it was simply a case of famous last words. The fact that I cannot remember with precision what her response was in an otherwise clearly recollected conversation probably reflects the imprecision of her answer. She could not come up with a coherent rationale for her denunciation of the book. As I reflect on, in hindsight, on that conversation, with the benefit of 6 months of the Jewish onslaught to guide me, it seems as if the major Jewish agencies issue edicts, as it were, then the Jewish rank and file simply fall in line. They're not to make reply. There's not to no reason why. There's but do and die. The power of the Jewish leadership over the constituency is impressive indeed, the presence of some dissenting voices notwithstanding. And then he goes on. He talks about how all the stuff he had to go through, but I'm not going to prolong that. I would just encourage you just to read all of that. Okay. Really something. All right. So now what we're going to do, let's go ahead and switch up, and we're going to play his talk here. I'm going to scroll up a little bit because there's some intro there, and then we'll get right to the main part. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get this book up. This video up for you guys, and let's sit back and enjoy this. This is a good one here. All right. Like I said, I'm going to scroll through it a little bit just to get to that part for you. And here we go. And I might interject here and there. I might, but I would like to let this thing play out. All right, here we go.
Their involvement.
Oh, shoot. Hold on. My video. Hold on. I was like, hold on. Where's that coming from? That's my music playing. Hold on. Okay, here we go.
In the transatlantic slave trade of Africans that brought. Thank you very much, Doug Christie. I'm very humbled by your very generous introduction. Thank you, Paul Frum, for setting up this lecture tonight. Thank you, Barbara Kalashka, the member of the Zundel team with whom I've had most contact over the last 2 years. It's amazing how time flies. It's been over 2 years already. You know my topic for tonight. I was asked to speak for about 45 minutes, so conveniently there's a clock right in front of me, so I'll keep my eye on the clock. I will begin my talk tonight in similar fashion to the way I began the book, The Jewish Onslaught. I was minding my business, teaching my course on African American history at Wellesley College in February of 1993, as I had done for 20 years, when a strange thing happened. The long arm of Jewish intolerance reached into my classroom. On the first day of the semester, 2 students from a Jewish students' organization known as Hillel, unknown to me, were in the classroom. I thought they were simply people who were getting ready to take the class. They remained in the classroom for all of one day. They never came back. But that one day was enough to convince them that I was an anti-Semite, that I was teaching an anti-Semitic book, as they put it, as truth, quote, unquote. The book was a book published by the Nation of Islam, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. It's a relationship which, in a sense, is not secret, because Jewish scholars themselves for many years have documented their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade of Africans that brought Africans from the African continent to the Americas. Even though the material had been published for a long time in scholarly tomes hidden away in libraries, and in that sense was not really secret, yet and still there was an element of secrecy about it, because the average person, Jew or non-Jew, really was not very aware of that very significant Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. I myself, as a professor of black history, and as one who had taught black history for over 20 years, for 20 years at Wellesley College, for a couple of years before that elsewhere, I myself was only vaguely aware of the Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. By some accident perhaps, or maybe by some design, the textbooks, most of the textbooks that most people read dealing with the slave trade, even when they mention Jewish involvement, they never identify those involved as Jews. One walks away from those books with the impression that all of these people must have been Christians, When it's to the detriment of some other group, they would normally identify that group. But whenever Jews are the ones who are doing wrong, somehow they tend to tiptoe around the question of ethnicity. So here was someone like myself who had who had studied this for over 20 years, and I was only vaguely aware of the Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. The book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, had been published about a year or two earlier. I had seen an advertisement for the book, I had bought it. I was very fascinated by the information, and I did then what I always do as a hopefully good teacher, and that is whenever I discover new exciting material, I modify my course syllabus. I add it to the course. I like to keep my students abreast of new information as I gather new information. So that's what I did. I included this material in my course outline. It so happens that by the time I got around to putting the book into my course outline, the Jewish organizations had apparently already become aware of the book, and they had already made a decision that this was a book that was to be suppressed at all costs. There's a black professor at Harvard University by the name of Henry Louis Gates, known as Skip Gates for short. He has been a major spokesperson for the Jewish onslaught, against black.
Sorry, y'all. Can y'all hear me? Sorry about that. I don't, someone was trying to FaceTime me. Sorry about that. So this part here, he's talking about Henry Louis Gates. Now, if you saw that short I did, I'll bring that image up while he's talking, okay? This is the same Henry Louis Gates that just so happened to drop this documentary that's coming out. But I'm gonna let you talk. So yeah, I want you to listen. Make sure you pay close attention to this part.
And he had already, unknown to me at the time, but he had already written an op-ed in the New York Times attacking the book. The op-ed actually had the typographical, the way the typeset was laid out on the page was actually in the shape of the Star of David. So here was an op-ed in the New York Times. I am told, I don't know if it's true, but I am told that this was the first time in the history of the New York Times when anyone had been given an entire page for an op-ed. Such was the importance that the Jewish establishment assigned to this book, that they took the unprecedented step of assigning an entire page for an op-ed denouncing this book. And they typeset the page in the form of the Star of David. And Henry Louis Gates was the editor, was the author of that op-ed. So by that op-ed, they had signaled in the most powerful way at their disposal almost, certainly in the media. This is the New York Times now, a full-page op-ed, Star of David. This was their way of signaling in no uncertain manner that this was a book that all should stay away from. Around the time that I introduced the book to my class, the Boston Globe, I live in Boston, the Boston Globe had also published an editorial on this book. So this was their way of telling people like me that we had better approach this book at our peril. Now, of course, I was not fully cognizant of all this. If even I was, it would have made very little difference. I tend not to be influenced by other people's opinions if I strongly believe in my heart that I'm doing the right thing. So I introduced the book. So what happened was that the Hillel students, this Jewish organization Hillel, the Hillel students who sat in my class on that first day, they said afterwards that they had gone to the student bookstore in the days approaching the beginning of the semester. They claimed that they had happened upon this book, on the shelves, and that had caused them to come to my class on the first day to see whether I was teaching this book as hate. Of course, for anybody who has ever been in a university, you know that very little actual teaching is done on the first day of class. On the first day of class, you take people's names, you introduce the syllabus to them, you give them an idea of what to expect, how many exams, and what will be on the syllabus for the semester, and so on. But you don't really get substantively into the material. Anyway, after the one day, they just went about their business and claimed later that they were convinced that this was a hateful book that I was going to teach. Things escalated very rapidly thereafter. Apparently, they went to the Jewish rabbi on campus. I'm still not sure if they acted independently. My suspicion is that from the very beginning, they may very well have been in collusion with someone else, but I don't know. They went to their rabbi. The rabbi called me, tried to set up a meeting. They went to the chair of my department, Africana Studies. They went to the dean of the college, one Nancy Kolodny, who apparently is a very observant Jew. They went to everybody they could. I told their rabbi when she called me, I said to her, well, okay, I tell you what. If you think that this book is racist and anti-Semitic, and I ought not to be teaching it, she wanted to come to my office to have a meeting with me. So I told her, well, I have a better idea. Why don't you come to my class? If you think the book is so awful, I will give you an opportunity to come to my class and to talk to my class directly about how awful this book is. I will let the class read the book, and then I'll let them decide for themselves whether what you said was true or whether what I say, that the book is, a straight, factual account of the Jewish involvement in the slave trade is correct. This, to me, for anybody genuinely seeking truth, would have been a golden opportunity, to bypass me and come direct to my students. She said yes, she would. But of course, having reconsidered it for a day or two, she called me back and said no, she didn't think that was a good idea. And this became, the pattern that was to replicate itself over and over for the next several years. I've discovered in this battle with these folks for the last several years that they'd never liked to flush out the truth in a normal, open fashion. They seem to operate best when they can use their leverage over whatever in the media or whatever to defame you from a distance, but they avoid open debate as much as possible. So she preferred to stay in the background and write memos and stuff, but she would not come to my class to confront me in front of my students. Things escalated again very rapidly. We have an institution called Academic Council, whereby it's basically a faculty meeting that takes place periodically. A few weeks afterwards, I'm not sure precisely when, I went to an Academic Council meeting, and to my surprise, my chairperson, another black person like myself, from my own department, obviously Africana Studies, to my surprise, he got up and made an impassioned speech denouncing me as an anti-Semite. He was followed by a Jewish professor. They had set this up prior to the meeting. This was an unusual procedure for an academic council meeting, but they had obviously set this up. So he was followed by a guy called Larry Rosenwald, a Jewish professor, who did the same thing. And from that point on, you could say the battle was joined. Things went downhill very rapidly. The student newspaper began publishing these inflammatory articles encouraging students to boycott my classes and so on. At the next meeting of the Academic Council, I asked for permission to respond to the speeches that had been made by the Africana Studies chairman and Larry Rosenwald. They gave me permission, and I spoke. My speech is actually reprinted in the book, The Jewish Onslaught. It's near the end of the book. It's called An Answer to My Jewish Critics. I basically told them that I was, a historian. I had to take the facts wherever the facts took me. I explained to them that I had been teaching this course at Wellesley College for 20 years. I had dealt with the involvement of Christians and Muslims, even African collaborators in the slave trade. Wherever the facts took me, I went. I had become aware of the Jewish involvement, and I saw no reason why anybody should object to my dealing with the Jewish involvement. And I asked them rhetorically, who were they who gave them the authority to come into my classroom to tell me what I should teach, what I should not teach? And who were they, people who claimed to have been the victims of great suffering? What kind of authority did that give them to come and try to introduce this kind of extreme censorship into my classroom? A large contingent of my students were present in the Academic Council. They were not supposed to be there, but they came anyway. They tried to get them out, but they stayed. And of course, I was greeted with much applause from my students. I was greeted with stony silence from the rest of the gathering. At this time at Wellesley College was under the power and authority of a large number of Jewish people. The image of Wellesley College that most people have who know about Wellesley is a college which is the bastion of the WASP element, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant element. And that may be what it was a long time ago, but in recent years, the Jewish element has emerged as a very powerful force. And at one time, during the early stages of this Jewish onslaught at Wellesley College, I actually faced a situation where the acting president of the school was a Jew. The dean of the college was a Jew. The head of student government was a Jew. The assistant head, deputy head of student government was a Jew. The head of the board of trustees was a Jew. Possibly the majority of the tenured faculty were Jews. Many of the major figures in key positions, vice presidents of this and that, those kinds of folks, dean of this and that, a lot of those folks were Jews. So clearly, literally, I was dealing with a school in which Jewish power was entrenched.
And sorry, I'm going to interject again as he's talking here, because this is in his book, but I want to show you some of the hate mail that he received. Okay, that's why I said this book, he has a lot in it. Let me just drop it on the screen here. This is some of the things that he received here, and you can look it up. You can look at it yourself. These are from Jewish people that was sending him this kind of stuff here. All right. So you can take a look at that. That's in his book. All right. And remember, they like using the ape thing. Where did that come from? Maimonides. Maimonides, he referred to black people as apes. So you got, even now, that's as soon as, even as recent as this is the kind of stuff that he was receiving. That's one. And then here's another one that he received as well. Yep, that's all from them. And he has this in his book. Yep. So yeah, we're going to show all of it. We're going to show all of it. We are uncovering all of it. The games, they don't work anymore. We're not playing, no more games. The gaslighting, we're not doing the gaslighting anymore. The feigning victim stuff, it doesn't work with us anymore. Y'all they don't pick the wrong people in the wrong generation to try to continue that legacy of passing the buck. Nope, we're looking at all of it. And we're going to show all of it. Okay, so let's get back to the video.
It was the context in which I had to deal now with this Jewish onslaught. My students, like I said, were a great source of support from the very beginning. Within a matter of days, the Jewish students from Hillel began circulating on the campus an article, the very same op-ed I spoke about earlier, written by Henry Louis Gates, Skip Gates, now at Harvard. The same op-ed I told you about, typeset like the Star of David, denouncing the book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. They began circulating that op-ed, reprinted with a ADL logo on it, Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. Just as today, in the courtroom today, I was presented with my own book, The Jewish Onslaught, which apparently had been run off and circulated by the same ADL. It was a very strange, in fact, I should have asked for a souvenir copy, but it was a very strange, experience to see my own book with the ADL's logo on it, The Jewish Onslaught with the ADL's logo in the corner. So this, emergence of the ADL, this introduction of the ADL, convinced me that, it sort of reinforced my suspicion that quite possibly the ADL had been involved in the Hillel students' actions from the very beginning. Certainly they were involved from very early. Hillel, I read later in Paul Finley's book, I think it was, is actually a sort of a student affiliate of the ADL. There's actually an organizational connection between the Hillel students and the ADL. And then they're both in turn affiliates of the B'nai B'rith, whatever that is all about. So I found myself then under attack from the Jewish community on campus, from the Hillel students, from my own chairman, who apparently had made the decision that this was the time for him to exercise an opportunistic kind of an attitude. He realized that he was onto something big, that he could be rewarded handsomely if he sided with the Jews in that situation, and apparently that's what he decided to do. As I mentioned before, it was very difficult for me to get my point of view out into the marketplace. The president of the school sent out a statement to the entire school denouncing me, deploring my use of the book, and so on. Within about a couple of months or so, by about April, things escalated further when the outside Jewish organizations entered the fray in great force. 4 of the major Jewish organizations came together and they put out a press release. I've actually seen, in fact, I have a copy of the press release. I don't even recall where I got it. But in the book, The Jewish Onslaught, I liken this press release to a medieval scroll. It reminds me of the kinds of scrolls I used to see as a kid when I went to watch Robin Hood movies. You know, the sheriff of Nottingham would come and he would unroll a big long scroll denouncing Robin Hood, and he would tack it onto a tree someplace in Sherwood Forest. It was that, literally. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was about this size, and it was a real medieval scroll. Subsequently, I discovered, and I mentioned this in the book, but I think I discovered it on radio. They had me debating some Jewish guy one night on the radio, and he actually said that this was unprecedented. This guy was a top official of the American Jewish Congress, I think it was, or committee, one of the two, in Boston. And this group was one of the signatories to that scroll, that press release. And he said on the radio that what they did was unprecedented. Never before, to his knowledge, had 4 of the major Jewish organizations come together to jointly issue a press release denouncing a single individual. Not only that, he said, but apparently this had been done in the midst of one of their high holidays. I don't recall which one. And that made it even more unprecedented that they broke whatever, I'm not sure if it was a Sabbath or whatever it is, but they actually broke the sanctity of this high holiday to actually get together for this political purpose. So that was the level of priority which they assigned to denouncing my use of this book. You know, I'm talking about the Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. The 4 organizations were the Anti-Defamation League, ADL for short, the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, and the JC, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. Those were the 4 organizations. The press release which they put out was a sort of a model of lies and deceit. This morning in the court, Doug Christie led me through the areas in the book where I described, lie by lie, the lies and half-truths that were contained in this document. They said, for example, that I'd never let my students discuss the book. You know, they tried to paint a picture of me forcing this book down the students' throats and not giving them a chance to discuss it. First of all, there was no way they could have known how I dealt with the book, because by the time we came around to discussing the book, the Hillel students had long gone. None of them were there in the classroom. You know, they said that I was arguing that Jews were, the most important people in the slave trade, which they were in some areas, but not in every area. But there were a whole bunch of lies, just straight up lies.
And aren't they doing that now? They're doing that now with Candace, aren't they? The same thing. And he literally has a chapter in his book. It's 2 pages. I'm going to read it later, but there's 2 pages where he talks about, he hits this argument. I mean, he smacks it down. And the title of the chapter is Some Jews, because this is what they like to do. They always like to say, they like to debate you on, no, it was only some of us. It wasn't all of us. It was just a little bit of us. Right? They always like to say that. But see, use that, but yet you guys will hunt down 100-year-old Nazi guards and say, never forget, right? But and you have all this tenacity and all this stuff that you use to hunt down these old people that were guards. You don't say, oh, but they were little guards. You don't care. You know that these people had an active part in a system that you said that it was oppressing you, right? So we as black folks, we should have that same tenacity when it comes down to identifying all those people who oppressed our ancestors, right? Don't take that from us now. We do that. We should have the same attitude as well when it comes down to that. But see, you don't see it the same. Nope, ain't doing that. All right, I'll let him continue to talk here.
And that, of course, was the signal to the rest of the media. And again, today in the court, the question came up of Jewish, influence in the media. Jews have a tremendous influence in the media. And I pointed out to the tribunal this morning that when in the book I speak about the great Jewish influence in the media, not only am I speaking from my own experience, but I was actually quoting a Jewish writer, Charles Silberman, who wrote a book called A Certain People, in which he was actually boasting. This was 1985. He was actually boasting in that book about the Jewish control of the media. He said in that book that there were, I think, 7 senior editors or something at the New York Times, and they were all Jews. He said that most of the top producers at network TV were Jews. He went on to explain that the producers were the most crucial people in TV. They were the ones who were in charge, of prioritizing news, of deciding which news items to give prominence, which ones to suppress. And those decisions were made by the producers. Those were the key people there. They had more power even than the persons who mechanically just read the news. He mentioned that many of the anchor persons, and he mentioned them by name, Marvin Cobb, Wallace, the guy who runs 60 Minutes. Is it Richard Wallace? Mike Wallace, yes, who runs Barbara Walters, and a whole bunch of others. He actually mentioned them by name. He was actually boasting. His was a book written, I guess, to make his fellow Jews feel good. So, of course, I pointed out this morning in the tribunal that when I said that the Jews were highly influential in the media, I was simply quoting from their own sources, written by themselves, in which they were gloating practically over this fact. And the power of the Jewish media hit me, immediately, because once these 4 organizations published that press release, it spread literally around the world, instantaneously. There have been many times when I've tried to send a press release on something or other to the media, and I might send it to about 200 papers. I'll be lucky if one of them carries it, on page 95 in fine print under a cartoon or something. But instantaneously, literally instantaneously, this thing was in all the major newspapers. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Chicago Tribune. It was in the Baltimore Sun. It was all over the place. I had a friend who was traveling in Hong Kong. He said he saw it in an English language newspaper in Hong Kong. I had a friend who was in St. Lucia in the West Indies. Of course, nowadays with cable TV, of course, the American cable TV network, CNN, and these folks there, they must be in every hotel room in the world by now. So this guy saw it in CNN in some hotel room in St. Lucia. Friends in Trinidad who have cable and satellite dishes, pick up American stations, they saw it from in Trinidad. This thing was literally spread around the world instantaneously. Then major networks, major newspapers began, calling up for interviews and so on. The Today Show did about 2 interviews. They sent people to the college. Ted Koppel with his Nightline, he sent a crew down to interview folks. There was a big segment on Nightline about it. And that's the way it went. NPR, National Public Radio, they did a thing. And so it became a major story. So here was something that began almost literally with nothing. They created an incredible story out of nothing. Here was I including less than 1 day's worth of readings on the Jewish involvement in the slave trade. And they had taken this, and that, if nothing else, that shows their power over the media, that they could take nothing and manufacture out of nothing a major story, to the point where Brinkley, this guy Brinkley, who has his program, his talk show every Sunday morning on ABC TV, The Week with David Brinkley. Normally they talk about matters of great import, national and international matters, presidential matters and matters of war and peace. Cokie Roberts, David Brinkley, and a couple of the guys, Donaldson guy, Sam Donaldson, and somebody else. But every Sunday they're on the TV there, prime time. And these folks took a whole segment out of their program to denounce me for using.
Now, I need to mention this to you. You hear all of this? All of this stems from him suggesting to his class, hey, we should read this book. He didn't even get to teaching it. And you see all this stuff. But I want to mention this, and this is a very important thing I want you to process here. Now, for some of you who are listening to this, you may say, yeah, that's right. They did the same thing to Ron in his book. Hebrews to Negroes. I want you to park there for a second. They did. But see, here's the thing. You remember the other day in the video that I showed you, I said I held up 2 books, Hebrews to Negroes on one side and then the other book, Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, on the other. And I asked you, which one of these books can you still buy on Amazon? And everyone guessed correctly. It was Hebrews and Negroes. You can still purchase that. That is still widely available. But the other one, Secret Relationship, you can't get that. Now, in Ron's book, he does mention some of those things about Jews involved in the slave trade and all of that, some of that stuff. But then he's got some other stuff in there that's really not, it's not, you can argue a lot of these things, like some of the historical things, like the thing from, what was it? Time Magazine. There was a whole excerpt in there about from Time Magazine. I actually have the magazine. It was in a book, and it was like Hitler describing, these different people groups and all of that. And he mentioned something about, black people being Hebrew. It was something to that. I don't have it in front of me now. I have to dig to get it. But a lot of Hebrews took that and ran with it and said, see, he's saying that we're the true Hebrews. But if you read the whole thing, no, he was actually saying how black people weren't even human. I mean, if you read it. But here's what I want to say about that. Yes, if you recall during that time, the media was going bananas. They were going nuts about this whole Hebrews and Negroes thing. And so on one hand, you look at, see, they're just trying to scare people from the truth. Not exactly. Not exactly. Because like I said, you could still get the book. The book is still available. You can still find it. That's number one. Number two, the book is ultimately, it is telling black people, hey, listen. Okay, well, let me back up. Now, do you remember when this happened? And it was, what's the stadium in Brooklyn, y'all? The Brooklyn Stadium, basketball, where they play, the Brooklyn Nets play. Anyway, the stadium in Brooklyn, do you remember, it was one night, this is like at the heat of all of that debate and stuff that was going on. Do you remember IUIC that night seemingly came out of nowhere, and they blocked traffic all around that area the same night they were having this game? I mean, they were all over the place. And the whole time I'm scratching my head, the Barclays, thank you, Barclays, thank you. And the whole time I'm scratching my head like, how in the world did IUIC get a permit that quick in New York City during the game? How'd you get a permit that quick? And so a lot of folks were seeing this and it was saying, see, this is what we're all coming together. See, the Hebrews we're lighting it up and all of this stuff. And I'm sitting up here like, yeah, but you don't get a permit that quick. You know what I mean? I may not know, I don't know a whole lot, but I know you can't just grab a permit in New York that quick. That was one thing, right? And so, but like I said, in the book itself, the claim, as many of you know, is that the claim is that black people are the true Hebrews. Like some of you tonight watching this video, you may believe that. No, if you've been watching this platform, we have thoroughly looked at this thing. We're coming from a place where we even believed that at one time. But once you actually take a look at the whole thing, you will see that, no, it's not. It just isn't. Ultimately, what it is that this is just another thing where, as black folks, understandably so, we are looking for something we can identify. We can call ourselves, this is our history. This is our history book, that kind of thing, right? But as I've said, is that this is a book that literally was given to you by the same people that beat and raped and killed your ancestors. There is no logic, sane logic you can provide that will say that you should trust the people that beat the hell out of you and beat hell in you, and that at the same time they were perfectly preserving your book and said, here's your history book right here. There's no way. I mean, just that in of itself should cause you to be like, oh snap, no, that ain't it. Because I know some of you may say, well, see, fam, let's see, what you got to understand is that, see, they didn't really understand what they really had. But see, us in the spirit, when we really read it, it was written in a way that only we can understand. And you go through all of these mental gymnastics to try to make that your own. Okay, but I don't want to get too deep into that because you have to check out our other videos on that. But my point is this is something I said in a video that I said recently. I said Hebrew Israelites are the street, what did I say? The street warriors for Judaism. They're the street soldiers. That's what I said. The street soldiers for Judaism. When Hebrew Israelites are making these pronouncements about law, statutes, and commandments and how you have to follow the law, statutes, and commandments, how you have to follow the Torah, and that one day that America is going to fall, America is going to burn, and all of this stuff. This is the exact same terminology that people who are in Judaism, they teach the same exact things. They literally teach this. I have video after video after video of rabbis teaching the exact same things you would hear coming from IUIC and some of these other camps and just other Hebrews as well. I mean, you know of channels right now here on YouTube, all they put out is one day America's going to burn. One day America's going to fall. One day America, this whole thing is going to fall and it's going to burn and all of this stuff over and over. It's like I call it judgment porn because they're just so into that. But when you listen to these rabbis, that's what they put out all the time. And so when you have a group of people who are pretending to be you, but they're not you, but yet they are putting your message out, that's a useful tool, isn't it? And what I am saying is that those of you who are in it, that's what you are. And I'm saying this in I'm trying to be I don't know. I'm trying to be as nice as possible, but I have to tell you the truth. You are being very useful for them when you are putting out their message, but at the same time, you don't have any power. But you may say, well, Dwayne, one day this thing's going to flip and we're going to have the power. Do you understand this? We've been saying this stuff for years and years and years, and it's still the same thing. Anyway, I'm really trying hard not to get too deep in this because we're trying to get to what this brother is saying here. But I'm saying this because it's something that must be understood. In this particular case, when you're looking at Hebrews and Negroes, the treatment that got, yes, it was very similar to this, but at the same time, it was a psychological move because they knew that, hey, if we appear that we're fighting against this and we're trying to suppress this, it's going to cause more people to want to make sure it's going to solidify these people to rally around this book so that they can continue to believe this ideology, because this ideology is actually helping us. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in this case where Tony Martin, they were just completely trying to shut him down. But in the case of Hebrews and Negroes, that didn't happen. There was some pockets of that, but it's still available. So that's what I'm saying. You got to understand how this thing operates. They allow a lot of these people on social media to say a lot of this stuff because it's actually helping to push their narratives out. You understand what I'm saying? And you got a lot of black folks who are pushing this stuff and they don't realize that they are sounding exactly like a lot of these rabbis who say the same exact thing about death to America. America's going to fall. Israel's going to rise. All of the nations are going to be slaves to us, all that kind of stuff. That's the same thing. These rabbis say this stuff all the time. So if they have somebody that they can have out there saying the same message, why not? And you may say, well, Dwayne, but a lot in Hebrews, a lot of times they'll say that these people are fake and all this stuff. Okay, they're like, okay, fine, whatever. Okay, you want to say Jesus is black? Okay, fine, we don't care. As long as you get our message out that America's going to fall and that the nations are going to be our slaves, as long as you keep pushing that out, we ain't got no problem with that. Keep on saying it. Keep on putting that out there. Keep putting that fear porn out there. Keep putting that out there because that's exactly what we're doing. There you go. Mackenzie said it. He said they're playing chess. I'm telling you, that's what it is. Anyway, let's get back to what this
consequential as this to be elevated to that level of madness. And I still think of it as total madness, even now, after 7 years, when I reflect on it, it appears to be something that almost didn't really happen. It's like a bad dream almost. Luckily, I was not without resources. I figured that if I could not get my material into the mainstream newspapers, that I would find some way to get my word out. As a historian, I'm very conscious of the need for oppressed people to get their point of view onto the historical record. Too often, those who do the oppressing are also the ones who succeed, and the Jewish group was and is exceedingly skillful at what I call seeding the record. In other words, and I've seen this in many cases, I saw it this morning, they will write a scurrilous, defamatory article about you in the New York Times or the Boston Globe or the Baltimore Sun, some prestigious newspaper. And then 5 years later, they'll turn around and use that same article as evidence against you to show that this great prestigious newspaper denounced you as an awful person, when in fact the article was without merit. It's an article that they, in a sense, planted. So if one is not careful, one can, in historical terms, in the light of history, one can actually look back and have to deal with a historical record which is totally distorted based on the machinations of people who have actually seeded the historical record over the years. So I discovered that, as a historian then, and aware of all this, I figured that I had to find some way to get my point of view into the marketplace of ideas, as I put it, and that's when I hit on the idea of producing my broadsides. Over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years, I did 4 broadsides. The first broadside I called broadside number 1, and I think this really blew their minds. It was called Blacks and Jews at Wellesley News, broadside number 1. And it went through 4 editions, up to broadside number 4. And this amazed them because in the past, in fact, and subsequently too, the power of the Jewish organizations is so great. And this is real power. I mean, they've destroyed so many people that, most people, I think, who find themselves in confrontation with them tend to back away or apologize or run away or play dead or something. And the way they attacked me, one could tell they attacked me with full confidence that they would just roll all over me. Who was I? A single individual in a school surrounded by a Jewish power structure in the school in which I was teaching, a black person in America. I wasn't even born here, so who was I? And there was this sense of extreme confidence that they would literally just roll all over me. And so the broadside blew their minds. It took them by surprise. I don't think they'd ever had to deal with anything quite like it, because here was I, my poor little lonesome self, basically, joining battle with them. And what I did in the broadside and what I eventually did in the book, The Jewish Onslaught, and again, being a historian was very useful. I decided to place my situation in a wider context. I began to look again at the whole history of black-Jewish relations in America, because, and I think this is one of the reasons too why they were so upset with this book, the book published by the Nation of Islam, and that is there has been an elaborate myth that has been developed in America over a number of years, whereby the Jewish community has positioned itself as the great liberal force pertaining to the blacks in America. In other words, their position, the myth is that, other white folk may have done you this and that, enslaved you and whatnot, but we were always your friends. We were the ones who always helped you. We suffered just like you. As a matter of fact, we suffered more than you. So we can totally appreciate your suffering. And what this book did, whether this was the intention of the authors or not, but what this book did in a sense, and I think that the Jewish establishment were the first to realize it, was that this book, in a sense, pulled the rug from under this elaborate mythology that they had developed over a very long period. Because if they were actively involved in the slave trade like everybody else, then clearly they couldn't have been that liberal from time immemorial as they claimed to be. So they saw this then as, again, just pulling the rug from under them, and they saw this whole elaborate mythology of liberalism to black folk, about to be demolished by this argument. So this was the mythology, and I decided to to look again at that view of black-Jewish relations. And I pointed out that the civil rights struggle, which they claim to have been so helpful in, that the civil rights struggle was, in a way, their involvement in the struggle for civil rights, in a way, was motivated by self-interest, that very often they were the ones who benefited very often from the civil rights struggle of blacks, that they helped the struggle as long as they could control it. As long as they could control it and dictate it into areas which were beneficial to them, that was fine. When the early civil rights movement, the early non-violent Martin Luther King integrationist sort of phase of the movement, when that sort of moved into the more black power, militant, black separatist phase of the 1960s, when people like Martin Luther King began to be supplanted by people like Stokely Carmichael, like Malcolm X and so on, as the major influential figures in black America. When that happened, and when, as a consequence of the black power revolution, when many of those Jewish-led organizations found themselves, when the Jews found themselves being expelled, because black power said, we want to control our own struggle, we want to be in charge of our struggle. This is a black struggle, we want to be in charge of it. And many of the civil rights organizations in the 60s, when civil rights turned to black power, began expelling the white members. But these white members, who very often were in leadership positions, were often Jews. So the Jews began to lose their position, yes, of power inside of the civil rights movement. And all of this was my argument in broadside number 1. And so I argued that when they found themselves being expelled from the civil rights movement, then, in a sense, they fell back on plan B. Plan A was to infiltrate the movement, run it from within. When they were no longer welcome within, plan B was to show a more severe, hostile face. As long as they were within, they could show a benign face. As long as that benign face was enough to further their goals and secure their self-interest, that was, there was no need to be overtly hostile to the movement. But once they found themselves unable to manipulate the movement from within, then my argument was that they became openly hostile. And that was when from that period is when I traced the development of what I call the Jewish onslaught. And I documented it very well. I showed, for example, that in 1968, when black folks were trying to introduce a curriculum in the schools in Brooklyn, New York, that was favorable to black students, when they were trying to get some more black teachers into the school system, the American Federation of Teachers in Brooklyn, New York, which was largely dominated by Jews, run by a guy called Shankar. They struggled against black parents' efforts to have a relevant curriculum and defeated their efforts eventually. And were able to reimpose Jewish domination over the teaching of black students and so on in Brooklyn, New York. I showed that when Andrew Young, who was the first black person appointed by President Carter to the UN as a US ambassador to UN, I showed that when Andrew Young, who was of course a great icon in the black civil rights movement, a very close aide to Martin Luther King and so on, I showed that when Andrew Young, as US ambassador to the UN, came up with the bright idea that if he, as US ambassador, was to mediate the struggle between Palestinians and Jews, then he might as well talk to both sides. It seemed very logical to him that if he was mediating the struggle, he might as well talk to both sides. Seemed like a normal, natural thing to do. But of course, the Jews would have none of it, and they got him fired. They put pressure on Carter, and they fired him. And that's one of the few times when the sort of mainstream, moderate civil rights leadership became so incensed that for a moment they became upset with the Jews. In fact, I quote in the book Julian Bond, the same guy now who has become a great spokesman for the Jews once more. But Julian Bond, for a short while, actually attacked the Jewish leadership over that issue. So these and other developments I highlighted. I talked about black professors who had been fired. I talked about Professor Fred Dubé, a South African, at the State University of New York in Stony Brook, who suggested to his students in an international relations class, he gave them 12 possible essay topics. And one of those topics was a topic which was very topical at the time in international relations. The General Assembly of the UN had just passed a resolution stating that Zionism was racism. So he gave them this, topic. And this was simply one of about a dozen topics he gave them. He said, well, here are 12 topics, choose one, write me an essay, term paper, or whatever. And that was enough to get him fired. You know, the Jews mobilized. They went to the chancellor of the New York system, and they got him fired. So these and many other cases I documented, all of these stemming from that period in the 1960s or so, when Jews began to be expelled from the civil rights movement. I showed how Jews had been among the founders of the NAACP. And I showed how even from the early days of the NAACP, they had used their position in the NAACP to undermine and to dominate and to manipulate the black struggle. Just around the time that I was doing this, I think it was in 1993, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, a major newspaper in Memphis, Tennessee, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, just by coincidence, published the result of an investigative piece that they had been working on for a very long time, in which they demonstrated that, among other things, that a man called Joel Spingarn, a Jewish man who had been head of the NAACP way back around the First World War. Joel Spingarn, during the First World War, around about, say, 1917-18, had a position in something known as military intelligence, in the Military Intelligence Department, a kind of a FBI, CIA type operation. I think he was a major in the Military Intelligence Department. And the Memphis Commercial Appeal showed that Spingarn was simultaneously head of the NAACP. He was a Jew running the NAACP, and simultaneously, he was also a major, I believe, in the Military Intelligence Department. And he was using his position in the Military Intelligence Department to obtain information on the black leadership. At one time, Spingarn actually called together the entire black leadership in America. Of course, people like, the more radical people didn't go. People like Marcus Garvey didn't go. But the whole mainstream, if you like, black leadership assembled in this man's farm in upstate New York, a place called Armenia, I think it was. So here was this man who was spying on these black folk, had all of them in his yard, so to speak, under a tent, feeding them for several days, reporting back to the Military Intelligence Department. So all of this I documented then in broadside number 1. So what happened then was that whereas they started this onslaught by trying to crush me for doing something totally innocent, with the broadside, I guess, again, I'm not even sure if I deliberately intended it to be this way or not, but by the broadside, what I did, intentionally or otherwise, was to sort of broaden the whole scope of this battle now, because no longer were they dealing with me simply on a question of the Jewish involvement in the slave trade, but in a sense, I sort of widened the field of struggle now, and they found themselves having to defend their position in black organizations, and I further attacked their whole mythology of being this liberal element in the black population for a large number of years. So broadside number 1, I believe, is what really, blew the whole thing open. At this point, they were just totally upset with me, and the level of the intensity of the whole thing, reached a very frenetic level. Luckily for me, in terms of getting my word out, in their frenzy, they actually, for a short while, gave me a little opening in terms of getting my word out, because the major news organs, people who would not normally have responded to my overtures, but who were responding to the Jewish organizations, press releases and so on, many of them, like I said, Nightline, the Today Show, a whole bunch of these big-time media agencies began coming to Wellesley College to do stories of this. I guess they were all fascinated by this black anti-Semitic professor who was bold enough, brave enough, or stupid enough to stand up to the whole might of organized Jewry in America. And they began coming to the campus, doing interviews and whatnot. And even though the interviews were always skewed against me, nevertheless, they still gave me an opportunity, if even it was 2 seconds. Whatever they gave me, I took, because for me, here was a golden opportunity to get my word out. It didn't matter how they surrounded what I said by hostile commentary before I came on and hostile commentary after. I figured that somebody out there, if I got 2 seconds to speak, somebody out there might just believe what I was trying to say. And I think that in their frenzy, I think they actually shot themselves in the foot, because they actually gave me for a short while. I think they eventually realized that their attempt this was part of their attempt to destroy me. They figured if I was seen by the populace at large, that I'd be totally discredited. But in fact, I think a lot of folks did sort of tune into what I was trying to say. And so they gave me invaluable exposure for a while. By the time they realized what was happening and pulled back, it was too late. You know, the word had gotten out, and by that time it had become a kind of a snowballing thing, and many smaller media outlets now began to contact me, outlets that weren't necessarily under the influence of the Jewish establishment. The black press was marvelous. You know, the black newspapers were excellent. The black radio talk shows I found to be totally fearless. I was highly, I guess, grateful to the black radio talk shows, especially. Some white radio programs began to contact me. I began to get a lot of mail, of course, a lot of hate mail, of course, from Jews, but I also got a lot of supportive mail from black folk and from white folk as well. In fact, one of the great revelations to me around this whole issue, something I hadn't really suspected before, was that apparently there was a large white community out there who was sensitive to this kind of issue, and that's something I really hadn't been quite aware of prior to this onslaught. You know, people would send me material. I have a whole library of books now. In fact, one of the reasons why the Jewish onslaught was able to be produced so quickly, and one of the reasons why I was able to get so much information, I was able to cram so much information. I was able to get so much research, into that little book in so short a time. And one of the reasons why is because so many people sent me information. People would send me books. They would send me references to other books. They would send me obscure articles. They would send me Xerox things. They would email me information. And so I actually, overnight, I had a huge archive of material that I could use. And I used it to very great effect in the Jewish onslaught. The book, The Jewish Onslaught, I began writing that book, would you believe, in the summer of 1993. This would be maybe 6 months or so after the onslaught had begun. And I began writing that book as another broadside. The broadsides were normally 4 to 6 pages long, letter size, typical newsletter format. And I began writing that book. That was supposed to be another broadside. I sat down to write the book, and to my surprise, I had read so much by this time in such a concentrated fashion that once I sat down and began to write this 4-page broadside, the most amazing thing happened. It's like the information just began to pour out of me. I mean, it was like as though I was transfixed by some greater force. And literally, I mean, this thing just poured out of me. That book was written in about 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, I can't believe it. Looking back at it now, I can't believe it. But I had sort of absorbed so much of this information, and I had lived, on the front lines of this battle for 6 months, that it was, it had become part of me, part of my being, and it just poured out. And I was actually writing this book and researching it at the same time. I would write a few pages, I would discover there was some element I wasn't aware of. I would go research that, come back, write a few more pages, and people would be still sending me stuff. It was very hectic, but I put it together in no time at all. The book was finally published, I believe, early in December of 1993. And if the broadside number 1 caused consternation, this book, I suspect that several leaders of the ADL probably may have had apoplectic attacks when this book came out. Because if the broadside blew their minds, this book, I don't know how I would characterize the impact that this book had on them. Again, I don't think that anybody had ever done this to them, had responded to them in this upright, forthright manner. And the book wasn't a wild, a diatribe. I wasn't saying Jews should go to ovens. I wasn't saying that Jews this and that. The book was a scholarly book. It was a polemic. It was a serious book. It was a polemic. It was written with great force. But nevertheless, it was a scholarly book. It was well documented. It was well argued. It was a revisionist book. It was revising that whole mythology of the liberal Jew, as far as he was in contact with the African-American struggle. And again, the book had a great impact. And once more, and this is something else that I discovered. Despite their great power, they will sometimes shoot themselves in the foot, despite their great power. The power has bred a level of arrogance, a level of carelessness. I guess they have won so many easy victories that they've gotten to the point where they assume that every victory is going to be easy. And when someone stands up to them, for a while, they almost don't know what to do, because it was as though they hadn't had to deal with that kind of a resilient force for a long time. It was something new to them, and with all the powers, almost as though for a short while they didn't know quite what to do. It's as though someone came along with a bag of tricks, and they had exhausted all their tricks. They had demonized me in the press. They had tried to get me fired. You know, they had planted material claiming I was having a illicit sexual relationship with a student. They'd done all the things they normally do. They pressured my employers. They'd gotten Uncle Tom Blacks to denounce me. You know,
And if you look him up in Wikipedia, he mentioned that about sexual relationship with student. It's actually in Wikipedia. Like they said that he was wandering in the dorms where the women were, when the women students were, and it's the way it's written. They try to make it seem like he was like propositioning some of the female students and all of that. So you see what they're doing. They always do this kind of stuff. Always. It's entrapment. They always look for a way they can entrap you. So they catch you, talking to somebody, or it looks like they'll send somebody. And remember, it was a text message I saw of somebody. They said we need to send an underage girl his way or something like. They do this stuff all the time. But yeah, if you look him up, Tony Martin, on Wikipedia page, they have a section where they mention that again, they try to find any kind of way to throw mud on his name. But yeah, we ain't buying that no more. The tricks don't work anymore. We ain't buying any of that. No, sir. What I'm gonna do is I'll probably like jump a little bit ahead on this. I actually have this documentary. I have this whole speech in its entirety. I'm adding that to the collection, our digital library, and you can get the whole thing and download it and watch it on your own. Or if you look hard enough, I believe you can still find this on YouTube as well. Okay. But anytime we come across information like this, we want to immediately download it and immediately save it, because we don't trust these folks. We don't trust any of these people to keep our history. Anyway, let me go, and then you're going to see me kind of jump ahead a little bit so I can wrap this up for you guys. Okay.
They had pulled out all the tricks from this well-worn bag that they had been carrying over their shoulder for the last, several years. And here was I now coming at them with the Jewish onslaught, a well-reasoned, serious book, a book which as I like to put it, I like the word conjure. I borrow the word conjure from Shakespeare. I think it's from Julius Caesar somewhere. But whatever happens, that book is a book which they will have to conjure with till the end of time. There's a power in the written word. That book is on the record. It doesn't matter how much they denounce it. It doesn't matter what they say. That book, they will have to conjure with till the end of time. 500 years from now, they'll have to conjure with that book. And it's a book which they, in a sense, are responsible for. Yeah. So once again, I got invaluable publicity. I think it was Nightline who actually held up the book. Could you imagine? I mean, that's publicity I couldn't buy in a million years. Nightline program with the Jewish onslaught, back up on the screen like that. And the book, I have my own publishing company, and that's the fastest selling book I've ever published. As a small company, I do small print runs. I did an initial print run of about 5,000, I think. That sold out in about 3 weeks, thanks to Ted Koppel and Nightline and the rest of them. So I did a second printing. That was gone in no time at all. Then I did a third printing. I'm not sure how many books I've sold, but I know the first two printings were 10,000, and those sold out. It's now on a third printing. So I know I've sold over 10,000 copies of that book. But most of those copies were sold in the first few weeks. And of course, there were many lessons to be learned there. One lesson is the power of those folks, because I was leveraging off of their power. But similarly, if it was a book that they were pushing, they have the means to. It's incredible, and it's awesome actually, the kind of power that they have to, for good or for ill, whatever they want to promote. That media is an incredible thing. So the book came out then, and of course, by this time too, the black population was thoroughly enthralled. Black people around the country came to my rescue, and this too is something that I think was a factor in my favor. And that is, well, there were several factors in my favor. Several reasons I think why they weren't able to just totally demolish me as they had expected. Number one is that I was a scholar who had a fairly solid scholarly reputation. One of the first things they tried to do was to impugn my scholarship and say I was a bad scholar. But it was very difficult for them to do that when I had already published in all of their own scholarly publications, and I've published in a large number of the most prestigious academic journals in my field. I've published in some of the most prestigious academic journals in the field of African American history, in the field of American history, in the field of African history, in the field of Caribbean history, sometimes even further afield. You know, my scholarly reputation was very strong, and they were not very convincing, you know, going to the academic, you know, going to academic circles, trying to denounce my scholarship. They tried, but it didn't quite stick. Up to now, all these years, after 7 years of them trying to impugn my scholarship, up to now, I still find myself being invited by places like Oxford University Press to contribute to volumes. About a year or two into the onslaught, the Washington Post, Book World, asked me, you know, to write some stuff for them, so that clearly they were unable to crush, to totally sully my reputation as a scholar. I'm sure that I took a hit. I'm sure that I could have gotten many more opportunities, you know, and my career would have been much further advanced, I'm sure, without their onslaught. But the fact is I was strong enough to survive. Maybe not, you know, as comfortably as I would have otherwise, but certainly they were unable to destroy me as a scholar. The other thing in my favor, I think, was the fact that I had a very solid grounding in the black community. You know, I had a very strong base in the black non-academic community. I'm someone who is very well grounded in my community. I'm someone who is very well known in black organizations and so on. And I would say for what, maybe a year or so after this onslaught started, you know, there was a time when for months on end I would not spend a weekend at home. You know, small black organizations, you know, little study groups very much like this. You know, there are many groups like this in the black community, you know, that provide alternative information and so on. Study groups, they call themselves sometimes, forums of all kinds. You know, they would be inviting me all over the country. I found that students on campuses, including very often the black students, were also very, very supportive. And usually when I turned up on a campus, the Jews would organize. They would be outside handing out all kinds of scurrilous information and so on. They would always be there. But again, the black students were very steadfast. They were very strong. And I was full of admiration for the black. These are young black kids. And that made me feel very, very good, you know, for the future. Because these young black kids were unafraid. They were unafraid. Sometimes they went through hell and high water to get me on campus. Sometimes it was, again, sometimes it was so surreal, you know. I remember going to Columbia University to speak, you know, and things were so wild at Columbia that they had to get security guards to escort me to the room and escort me back to the, you know, to the room where I was staying overnight. You know, it was, again, it was unreal. The same thing happened at a variety of other schools. You know, there was actually fear that you know, grievous bodily harm might befall me. And again, you know, all because of nothing almost, just because these folks had artificially created a great issue when in fact there was largely nothing to begin with. So the Jewish onslaught then, the book, you know, took things even to a higher level, and there things remained for quite some time. There were several lessons. Oh, I should mention that one of the very helpful things that happened was a big rally. The black community had a huge rally for me in Harlem. You know, in the midst of all this, you know, several black organizations got together, and they had a huge rally. You know, I don't know how many hundreds of people there were there, but there were several hundreds of people there in a big school, Harriet Tubman School in Harlem. It was a very beautiful thing. And again, there were many other smaller rallies all over the place, all over the country. I was crisscrossing the country. I was going to Oakland, California. I was going to Los Angeles. I was going down south. I was in the Midwest. I was all over the place. But clearly, you know, I got the sense that despite the power of the Jewish onslaught, I got the sense that there was definitely, you know, a solid grassroots movement out there. There were people out there who were willing to stand up and to be supportive. And that I found to be a very helpful thing. Now, there are several, my 45 minutes is just about up, so there are several lessons I think that I took away from this Jewish onslaught. Maybe I could just summarize a few of the lessons that I took away from this, and of course, I'll be more than happy to, you know, to expand on anything you want me to during question time. I think the first lesson I took away from this experience was, as I have hinted already, that the Jewish power almost said in this country, but in this country too, in fact, and in the US of A, in both countries, in North America, is awesome. It is really awesome. You know, they have the power The power of the media is awesome, the power of money, the power to influence other people. I discovered that what surprised me was that even though here was I, someone in a comparatively weak position, being willing to stand up and fight back against these forces, I found that many people from mainstream white America who were much more powerful than I was, and who were, as powerful as the Jewish group was, who had as much money as they did, and who you would have expected would have been less fearful. I found that many of the mainstream white folk in North America, despite what I consider to be their great power position, were nevertheless somewhat cowed, either cowardly or cowed by Jewish aggressiveness. And I still am not quite sure why this is, but there seems to be a fear out there, and I guess the Jewish organizations like the ADL and so on, they're very aware of this, and they've gotten into the habit of bullying everybody because they have this expectation, and in many cases this expectation is realized, that once they bully folks will just back away from them. So that's one lesson I take away from them, that the Jewish power out there is real and it's awesome. In my book I quoted from Lenny Brenner, a radical Jew, interestingly enough, from his book Jews in America Today, where he looked at the Forbes figures. Forbes magazine every year does a listing of the richest people in America. Well, that's the US of America. And he analyzed the figures, I think it was for 1992. And he discovered that 1/3 of the billionaires in the Forbes list were Jews. Jews say they are something like 2.5% of the US population. So here was 2.5% of the population, and they were 1/3, 33% of the billionaires in America. So that's an objective reality then that speaks to the great power and influence which they have. But I found, nevertheless, that despite their great power, as I've said before, nevertheless, they could be resisted. And their power is not to be underestimated, but nevertheless, I don't suppose any entity is ever all-powerful all the time. And so my experience was that despite their awesome power, they will, like I said before, shoot themselves in the foot sometimes. Their very power gets in the way sometimes. It makes them act in an ungainly manner and so on. And perhaps, it's like a huge army, a huge immobile army fighting a very mobile guerrilla force. Sometimes the mobile guerrilla force will be able to outwit and outmaneuver a huge army with all its guns and B-52 bombers and whatever else it has. So that those are two lessons I took away. Another lesson I took away is a lesson which I knew in theory, but which I was able to see in practice, and that is that every group on the face of the earth has people who can be bought. It doesn't matter how oppressed a group is. There'll always be the Quislings, there'll always be the Uncle Toms in any group. And I saw it in my case with the chairman of my department. There were 2 black persons at my school who came out on behalf of the Jews against me, and they were both rewarded handsomely and almost instantaneously. Both of them were given endowed chairs. It's so amazing. At the next commencement, to everybody's surprise. And what was so interesting about it was that there was no effort to camouflage it. There was no pretense. You would think that it would look so obvious that they would give maybe one a chair this year and another one next year. They gave them both chairs right away. Plus any number of other perks as well. So in every struggle then you find that there are those who are willing to, I guess, compromise their integrity for monetary gain or for any other kind of gain. I discovered that part of well, first of all, I didn't discover, but my suspicion that the media is full of lies and distortions was greatly reinforced. I remember once taking the editorial from the Boston Globe. The Boston Globe wrote an editorial denouncing me for doing all kinds of things, for not letting my students discuss the book, for teaching the book as hate, all kinds of things. And this was while the class, that I was teaching, where this onslaught erupted, was still in session. And I remember taking this editorial from the Boston Globe to the class next day. This was the very class they were talking about, saying that I wasn't letting them discuss the book, and the book was this and that. And I read this editorial to the class, and that was a great object lesson for that class. That editorial was worth 1,000 theoretical formulations of what the press is this and the press is that. They were able to see for themselves Because these were the students that this editorial was talking about. And they were able to see for themselves. And this is major media. This is Boston Globe. This is major media. And they were able to see for themselves, how the media lies, how it distorts. Not only does it lie and distort, but it then prevents those who, like myself, who wish to respond, prevents us from responding.
Okay, the video itself is another like 4 minutes or so. So, but I'm just going to stop it here because he kind of, the main points he's made those, he's covered quite a bit of that. And I would encourage you to make sure you get a hold of his work there. He passed some years ago. I think it was in 2013. I'm not sure, maybe earlier than that. Not sure, but yeah, he's been going from us for some time now. But yeah, there's a lot of in there, and he's really covering. Again, this is a guy who all he was doing was simply in his class was just talking about, I'm going to mention their history. I don't even know if he even got around to doing that in the class because the school shut him down and he wasn't able to even get to that. But they were so afraid that Negroes were going to start picking up books and actually start reading their stuff. They did all of this stuff. So as I promised, there's one thing I want to mention here. He talked about how he said one thing he was surprised about was how white people seem to be very afraid of these people. And he's right. And I have a clip here of someone here. This is a preacher here. Where is it? Is this it here? There you go. This is Greg Laurie. Greg Laurie. I want you to take a listen to Greg Laurie here. Greg Laurie, he's well known in charismatic Christian circles. And I want you to take a listen to this dude as he describes himself. All right, take a listen.
And I think it's so important because I'm not Jewish. I'm a Gentile. And when I did my 23andMe test, I was hoping, is there some Jewish blood in me somewhere? And I found out I'm hopelessly Gentile. I am white trash.
Stop.
Well, no, I'm Scottish and Irish. And I said, my love for the Jewish people came after I came into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I was a confused kid going the wrong way in life. I heard about Jesus. I began to read the Bible, learn your history. That's where my love came for you and for the book that came through you. Everything we have came through the Jewish people. I'm not Jewish. I wish I was. I did one of those 23andMe tests. I was hoping, I have some Jewish blood. I have none. I'm just pathetically white. Irish, English, white trash. That's what I am. But I've grown to have a love for the Jewish people from my study of Scripture. And when I was invited to speak at the Museum of Tolerance right after the horrible attack on Israel with a Jewish audience, I told them everything I have has come to me through the Jewish people. All
right, so you got that one. And then let me find this other clip for you right quick here. And he's not the only one. I mean, a lot of people, particularly white people within Christendom, they share this same view. Let me find this other one for you here. Let's see. Man. Yeah, here it is. And this is Glenn Beck. He has the same sentiments. Take a listen to Glenn Beck on this. And Glenn Beck, he's a Mormon. All right, so take a listen.
Was born. But there is something about the state of Israel that connects deeply to me. To have the privilege to stand with the Jew is a tremendous honor, spiritually. So I want to read a letter that I wrote that I am sending to the state of Israel. To Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the honorable officials at the State of Israel. In this moment, I have chosen to ask you for citizenship in the State of Israel. I have nothing to offer but my voice of support. And some might say that my support might be more valuable as an independent voice. Perhaps they're correct. But my request for citizenship is not about words, it is about deeds. Why, one might wonder, would I want to embrace a heritage and identity that is so ruthlessly hunted down again and again? Yet it is precisely during such moments that we must choose to stand. I anticipate no privileges or exemption from the State of Israel. I instead yearn to align myself with those willing to rise, to fight, and sacrifice for the fundamental right to live. Is this not what both Israel and America embody? In closing, my desire for dual citizenship does not stem from any expectation of gain, but from a deep-rooted belief in standing with what is right and true.
So, yeah, you're going to find a lot of these people, man, I'm talking about within white Christendom, I should say, they actually, they long for that. They look up to these people that these are the untouchables and, we can't, and they're afraid. You can't say anything, and, but this is what's out here. But that's white folks, but you also got, we go back to the Black Hebrew Israelites. Again, they could say all they want that we're the true people and all of that, but everything you are saying, everything you're doing, you're literally looking over your shoulder at those people and copying the things that they do. There's no your grandparents weren't walking around saying Khan. You know what I mean? Or Shalom and Mishpachah. They weren't saying that. You learned that vocabulary from the very people that you're saying are fake. You learned that from them. And even the holidays and stuff like that, you learned that from them. You understand? And so, so even amongst black folks, and I told you, again, we talked about the black folks over in Dimona, Black Hebrew Israelite, a large community of black Americans who moved over to Israel as Black Hebrew Israelites. They are practicing Black Hebrew Israelites to this very day who are embracing Judaism. And they will not only embracing Judaism, but they're embracing Israel to the point where at a rate of 100%, their children are all enlisted in the IDF. So this is where it all leads at the end of the day. You can call them fake all you want, but the road that you're on leads to kneeling at their feet. Anyway, real quick, let's go here. As I promised, I said I went to take a look at Dr. Tony Martin's book here. And this is just very, very quick, y'all. I promise you. And let's take a look at his book here. And this was a section that this is one of the chapters. It's only 2 pages. I just want to read it to you real quick. And as you see, the title of it is called Some Jews. A favorite refrain of those Jews who would even admit of any Jewish involvement in the African Holocaust. And like I said, I have an issue with the word Holocaust. It wasn't a Holocaust because we never call our victims of this very tragic and unfortunate moment as burnt sacrifices to a god. That's what the word Holocaust means. It means a burnt sacrifice to a god. Black folks, when we were victimized, that wasn't a sacrifice to a god. So that's why we have to raise questions anytime we use this word Holocaust is used. Every other race will say it was a massacre. Every other race, when they were victimized and just randomly butchered and all of that, we refer to it as massacres. This group is the only group that refers to their quote unquote massacre as a burnt sacrifice to a god. And that was not a word that Germans came up with. That was a word that Jewish people came up with. They call it a Holocaust. But then later on, they tried to change it and use the word Shoah. which is a Hebrew word that it more translates to a massacre. It more relates to that. But you're not going to find too many Shoah museums. Some of them are out there, but the most of them, they title them Holocaust museums, burnt sacrifice to a God museum. That's what the word means. All right. So I just want to make sure we stay on that, because you need to keep that in front of your brain too. In the African Holocaust, there has been an admonition. You should say some Jews. All Jews were not involved in the slave trade, nor I say all Christians or all Arabs, nor did all Americans invade Grenada. And I am yet to meet the Jewish historian who will tell you that some Englishmen established an empire on which the sun never set. Furthermore, all kinds of Jews, from the Marxist radicals to the redoubtable, I hope I'm saying that, Professor Alderson of the Jewish Press, generalize about the Jews when it suits them. The some Jews business is yet another red herring in an attempt at special rules for Jews. It is understood by sensible people everywhere that reasonable generalizations do not necessarily have to include every single last member of a group. If it is acceptable to generalize for everybody else, then why, I ask, are Jews so privileged as to be the sole exception? If there are some Jews at Wellesley College who think that the Hillel people exceeded their bounds of civility in surreptitiously, I'm not gonna butcher it, sorry, monitoring my class, and that the Wesley News acted wrongly, perhaps even illegally, in denying me and one black student supporter access to their pages, and that the administration acted wrongly in sending their one-sided collection of hostile articles to the college community, to the press, and to all the school's alumni, or that likewise acted wrongly in condemning my use of the secret relationship without having one discuss the issue with me, or that the friends of Wesley Hillel acted contemptibly in sending a hostile package of information to my student's mother, or that the 4 Jewish organizations were presumptuously and offensive in the extreme calling on Wellesley College to fire me because they would rather not acknowledge Jewish culpability in the slave trade. If there were some Jews at Wesley whose sense of fair play moved them to identify with any of the above, then they kept their sense of outrage at such a palatable wrongdoing strictly to themselves. The campus of ultra-Zionists, who is usually in a state of war with the campus Jewish power elite, the power elite themselves, the liberals like the ones who for years have regaled me with stories of her civil rights involvement, the former infantile left-wing communists, now turned pseudo-liberal Jewish nationalists, all spoke as with one voice on this issue. It's a lie, they sang in choral unison. Jews were not an important part of the slave trade. Some Jews maybe, but that's all. The book is anti-Semitic and you are hateful for doing it. The ex-civil rights writer who was the first to write me a note expressing her disappointment with my choice of reading material. She was also the first to stop talking to me. She has now resumed acknowledging my presence since I loudly and shouted hello in her face in the presence of mutual acquaintances. A high-profile liberal actually called and told me off the record that he abhorred the effort to demonize me in academic council. When we met, however, it turned out that he was only playing the role of good cop. He wanted me to remove the secret relationship from my reading list because it offended the Jews. The only kind Jewish words came from independent radicals of the New York-based Committee to Stop Israel's Arms Traffic to South Africa. Not some, but practically all Jews who have expressed any opinions on this controversy seem to have fallen in behind the Hillel, ADL, American Jewish Committee, etc. line. By contrast, significant elements of the non-Jewish white Hispanic, and Asian communities on campus have been supportive. Support was expressed in varying ways at academic council, at the student senate, on television, in letters, and to me in private conversations. So yeah, so he covered quite a bit here. I'm just going to show you the you can see the what you call it, the table of contents here. Let me get to the table of contents so you can see all that's in his book here. Major media, Massa We Sick, Jewish racism, some Jews, Black solidarity, Afrocentrism, conclusion. Then he gets to, the support letters and some of the other things that he got and all of that on there. So it's a pretty well put together book there. And but yeah, so I just wanted to share that with you. I know this video, this broadcast has been kind of long there, but I appreciate you guys hanging there with me. But I think this is just important stuff that we got to use every platform that we have to make sure this stuff is getting rebroadcast over and over again. And we got to share this information to as many people as possible, because as someone just mentioned, there aren't too many Black platforms, I'm talking even the large ones, that won't even touch this issue. What they would like to do is to say it's all white people and we need to fight white supremacy, but they won't talk about this. They won't identify, they won't call it out for what it is. And what we're doing is we're calling this out for what it is. And especially when it comes to our history, one can say that for me personally, I would say the reason why I've been talking about this a lot lately is because I was on X or some platform, and I heard one of them literally say, several of them, they said we are the most persecuted in history. They said that out of all groups, we're the most persecuted. And they said that the world has always hated us, and we are always attacked. We are always criticized, the whole nine. And when I heard that, as someone who really loves and cherishes our history, and I'm not trying to get into the oppression Olympics here, but you and I, Black folks, we know that that's a whole lie. And the fact that these individuals actually profited off of selling us, and that excerpt that I read the other day where they said that as long as Black people were around, they said that their feet never touched the bottom. That's literally what they said in their book. They said that. That's why it's so important to keep Black people in the midst, because as long as we're in their house, it kept them away. We were a buffer. And that's why I'm telling you, all these Black preachers out here, I named you, what did I say? Church of God in Christ is one, and the AME Church. These are two denominations, I am telling you right now, you can mark it down, that are heavily involved in this whole pro-Zionist movement that you're going to start seeing really at another level starting in 2026. They are heavily involved in this, and they have agreed with the state of Israel that they will be using their platforms to continue or to take it up another level in pushing Zionism on their platforms. They just had a huge meeting over in Israel recently where they had all of these pastors come and basically take an oath to the state of Israel that they would be ambassadors for the state of Israel, for the government of Israel. So just like you heard Glenn Beck and all these people like, I only wish I was one of you people, you're going to start seeing more and more people, and they're out here now. Now, those are the real coons out here that I'm seeing. There are Black folks out here right now that are saying the same thing. They were only involved a little bit. I would slap you down if I ever heard anybody say that. Because all I'm going to do is like we're doing now. We are pointing you right to their sources, and their sources say differently. Their sources say it. And that's why they're so angry every time we bring this stuff up. But we're going to keep on bringing it up. All right. So make sure you hook up on that digital library. I'm going to be uploading some more things on there, some more books. Just give me a day or two and I'll just start uploading some more things. You already got over 700 books and stuff on there right now. I'm going to start putting some of these documentaries on here and some other things on there too. So for now, as long as we're able to do it, we're going to use the resources that are out here to get this information out so that you can have it as well. So we can be a decentralized community. I was so heartened to hear what he was saying about how the black community came together to basically to surround this brother and to protect him and to defend him. I absolutely love that. This is why, if you're wondering why this whole FBA versus people that are not born here, this whole thing, the reason why this is all birth, where this come from, that's all Fed stuff. Because that kind of treatment that Dr. Tony Martin received back then, he wouldn't have gotten that now. He wouldn't have gotten that now. And so that's why it's so important on this particular issue. We better start lining up, because this stuff's got to be exposed. And for those of you who had joined this broadcast maybe in the middle, we talked about, I named you two black history repository places. One on, did I say Howard University's campus? Howard University's campus is one. And then there's a museum in Harlem, the Schomburg Center. Both of them are named after Jews. Jewish people owning black history museums, or at least they are in a high position to control the direction of it. Let's say that. But the Schomburg is all Jewish. So this is a Jewish-owned museum that have all of these historical records of black folks. That should make you, why are they the gatekeepers of black history? Why are they the gatekeepers of black history? What if it was the other way around? You think they would be okay with that? Of course they wouldn't. So this is why it's important for us, as we get our hands on this information. For some of you, when you go to some of these places, you better start bringing your little cell phones. And they said, okay, now we're just asking you, you can look at it, but don't take any pictures. Bruh, listen, you look this way, you look that way, click, click, click. It may not be your cell phone. Look, you get a little small phone, and you can get even something smaller than that. Take your pictures, scan the mugs, and let's share it on our own servers. And let's make sure we're keeping our information, okay? Because we got to make sure we're keeping all of these receipts. Well, anyway, I really appreciate you guys spending this time with me as we go over this information, this intel. Make sure you share it with as many people as possible. Put your feedback in the comments below. If you have any questions for me, feel free to put it in there as well, okay? Thank you so much, you guys. Listen, you take care, and I'll see you again in the next broadcast. Take care.